This edition of the Ridley Report is brought to you by
George Bush at the Olympics. Where do I even start? George Bush demanding of all things freedom for, of all things, people. Since when was George Bush in favor of freedom for people? Listen to this Bush quote and ask yourself if it has anything to do with the George Bush you know. The United States believes the people of China deserve the fundamental liberty that is the natural right of all human beings, unquote. Liberty. You mean like the liberty to decide what you're going to put in your own body? The liberty to decide which public street corner you're going to demonstrate on when George Bush comes to town in America? Liberty, as in the right to be safe and secure in your own homes and persons from unreasonable searches? There may have been a George Bush who once spoke in favor of those things without being a hypocrite, but that day has passed. Mr. Bush now has so much tyranny on his hands that he's really not in a position to be criticizing other countries for tyranny. I have some advice for the Chinese communists having to listen to this hyperbole and hypocrisy coming from the leader of the formerly free world. Chinese shouldn't bristle when they hear this kind of thing. They should use it as an opportunity to point out George Bush's hypocrisy. It may be that the Chinese are less free, or that the Chinese country is less free than the United States currently, but it is certainly moving towards more freedom, while we move towards more tyranny. And I have a buddy, a New Hampshire libertarian friend, who actually moved to China and felt he had more freedom there, although I don't know how long he lived there. It was some period of time. Felt it was the freest country in the world. I find that hard to believe, and I'm not even ready to believe that it's freer than the United States, but it certainly is getting freer. There may come a day when China plays a role against the United States government similar to the role America's government played against the Soviet Union during the Cold War. The U.S. government during that time allowed a sphere of relative freedom to exist within its borders, and that partial freedom served as a beacon to the people enslaved by the Bolsheviks. I wouldn't be surprised if the same thing happens in reverse with China and the United States someday. Traditionally, when countries slide into depression and repression, as we are doing, foreigners are able to play a constructive role by raising concerns without fear of retaliation, raising concerns over human rights within the borders of the repressed nation. That may happen to us at some point. In the old days, of course, with Reagan, he was able to do it to the Soviet Union, and he was able to throw stones from a house that was not entirely made of glass. Now, I don't think we can do that anymore. You don't need to be a conspiracy theorist to be aware that the United States tortures its opponents, something none of the Christian nations of World War I ever did. According to Churchill, it was one of the only bad things they never did, and we've done it. By the way, I use the term Christian nations because that's the term Churchill used. The United States now has a larger percentage of its population incarcerated than any other Western country. It also has a larger per capita percentage of its has a larger percentage of its black population incarcerated than the apartheid regime did of the black population who lived there in South Africa. And it's not the meddling that bothers me so much. It's not the Bush criticism of China's record that bothers me so much. I'm not so much against that. That was something Reagan did, and I kind of liked Reagan to a point. But the problem is the hypocrisy. If you want folks in China to have freedom, you need to let folks in the United States have freedom. And again, I'm not saying that George Bush should be held responsible for every policy that is common in the United States, But if he hasn't done anything to speak out against it, if he in fact is in favor of all these bad policies, which he apparently is, then there's no ground for him to stand on in criticizing China. Oh, and speaking of free countries, why is it that only countries can be freed? Why can't individuals be freed? Or why can't individuals be free from countries? Anyway, just some thoughts on the latest news about this lame duck, awful president of ours, who probably was less bad than some of the other presidents we're going to get, and some of the presidents we could have had. This ramble is at its end.
By the way, this edition of the Ridley Report is brought to you by Sekel CAI, by Jason Osborne over at Sekel CAI. Sekel is the company that collects a whole different way. A collections company that knows you want your customers treated with respect. They know that not only do you want your money, you want to keep your customers. So that's why their motto is Sekel CAI. They collect with respect.
Sekel CAI, Sekel CAI.